Well, hello, my friends, once again. This is Luiz Lima here, broadcasting from Orlando, Florida. You are with us on Kardec Radio. This is Spiritism, a closer look. Once again, we do this program every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Tonight, we are going to take a closer look at habits and diseases. Yeah, they are related. And we kind of spoke about this a little bit in the past, but I think it's maybe time for a recap here. So, habits and diseases. First of all, let's try to address things so we can put things into context. What do we call a habit here? Well, we have habits like in everyday life. We brush our teeth every morning and stuff like that. Those are habits, but they are related to the material life, strictly material life. What we are saying here are the habits of the soul, the habits of the spirit. So every vices and virtues, things like this. Of course, there are good habits and bad habits. So here's the first question. What defines if one of our attitudes of the soul or the habits of the soul, what defines if it's good or bad? Every time you define something as good or bad, right or wrong, you have to use a reference because what might be bad for me might not be bad for you, because if we don't use the same reference, the outcome can be different. When I verbalize my opinion versus when you verbalize yours. So what is the reference that we use for good habits, bad habits, good things, bad things? It's the law of God. That is universal, immutable, unchanged. The law of God. So good habits are linked to virtues, and bad habits are linked to vices. So as we use our vices and virtues through the situations of our lives, we create, and if we insist on doing the same thing, we create good habits or bad habits. Now, good habits are always good. The problem is bad habits. If we get into this recurring practice of vices and using our vices to go on with our lives, those will create a snowball because it just piles up over time. And when I say over time, is not within one lifetime through the years. No, it's incarnation after incarnation after incarnation, to the point that this is going to create diseases in the body. Don't forget, the body, the physical body, is where the spirit unloads its moral and intellectual content. So if our morality, if our level of moral and intellectual development is not so great, and for most of us we are not, because we are undergoing trials and expiations, that's why we're here on earth for. So in that case, if we're not, it's more likely that we are going to generate these diseases. Some of them are pretty bad and pretty, I would say, uncomfortable for the body. Those are the worst of them. We call them degenerative diseases. And those are cancers, diabetes, arthritis, Alzheimer's, things like this. There's a whole list. We're not talking about each disease. It's just a concept here. So these diseases, degenerative diseases, they destroy the body over time. It's not something that happens just like that, but they destroy the body over time. And some of them are pretty much invisible for medicine and science. When it's visible, it's too late, or it's very hard to revert. So for things like this, diseases like this, to take place in our lives, in our bodies, to be to have their outcome consuming the body, two things have to happen. at the same time. We're going to go one by one. Two factors will have an impact on this thing. First of all, predisposition factors. Predisposing, I would say, factors. What are predisposing factors? Those are things like DNA, genetics. When we come on board, we bring it over at birth. So our DNA is a predisposing factor because our DNA can potentially, not necessarily, potentially generate some sort of, let's say, heart disease or liver disease or some sort of cancer, potentially. So we can born with genes that are favorable to create these diseases. Favorable. I'm not saying it will turn into disease. Favorable. Very important. Those are predisposing factors. So it's right there. It's dormant in our DNA, and we go on with our lives. These diseases, these potential hidden or dormant diseases will not happen. They will not materialize without the second factor, which is what we call the triggering factors. Something that triggers the process. Well, triggering factors are related to our behavior, our attitudes in life, what we do, the practice of vices. We spoke about this in the beginning. Practice of vices. So if we practice these vices, if we do these things that are bad habits, they go against the law of God. That's what vices are, right? Our attitudes that go against the law of God. If we do this, we are creating a triggering factor. So when you have predisposing factors and the triggering factors, that could be a recipe for disaster. For example, I might have a potential condition on my DNA for, let's just say, a heart condition. That's going to be really bad, really a problem. However, my behavior, my attitudes are never against the law of God. What happens? Nothing. It will not happen to anyone who does that. And the other way around, for example, the practice of vices will not create necessarily diseases in the same organ for everyone, because the DNA predisposition for every person is different. So you see, these predisposing factors and triggering factors, I usually say that the predisposing factors are the dynamite and the triggering factor is the match. If you light it up, it's a recipe for disaster. So triggering factors, but let's just think a little bit together here. Triggering factors, those are vices and bad attitudes and so. If you think in terms of percent, because it's easier for us to think it this way, how much percent am I responsible for my vices? I think it's pretty straightforward, right? 100%. I'm fully responsible for my vices and my attitudes and my behavior. Now let's go to the other side. Predisposing factors. How much percent am I responsible for them? DNA, intrinsic factors. How much percent? You see, don't tell me it's my mother and my father, because I have the DNA that I have because of my history, my spiritual history. And because of my spiritual history, I had to look for a father and a mother that would comply to forming a DNA that I need to express my spiritual history in a physical body. So I have the DNA that I have because of my mother and father? No. Ultimately, because of my spiritual history. And how much am I responsible for my spiritual history? 100%. So we have predisposing factors, and I'm responsible for them 100%. And we have triggering factors, and I'm responsible for them again 100%. So that's it. I am responsible for everything in my life 100%. Responsibility is on me. For your life, you're responsible for it 100%. So these diseases, the degenerative diseases, these bad diseases, they are, we can almost consider them karmic diseases because they are consequences of past actions, past lives that we are now having to deal with. So, and the big question is, how do we cure these diseases? How do we achieve cure? That's a whole different ball game. We need to, before we get into that, we need to understand a few things. So let's just say that someone has a degenerative disease. Let's just say cancer, which is very common in our days today, unfortunately. So person has cancer, you go through a diagnosis, and the diagnostics come out and it shows in there, and they do medical tests and labs, and we got the doctor's going to say, yeah, you have cancer, and you're going to have to undergo surgery to remove that organ, part of the organ, tissue, whatever it is, because it depends on the cancer. So from the medical point of view, when that is removed, that, let's say, tissue is removed, supposedly you get cured. So medicine will do that, perform the removal of the tissue, and will establish something that is universal in medicine now, which is, if this same cancer is not detectable, not visible for the medical profession within 5 years, then you're cured. That's how it's stated today. So the person goes into surgery, undergoes surgery. Let's just say everything goes well and surgery is a success, and the medical team will, follow what happens right after. Now, think about this. The removal of the tissue or organ does not change any of the two factors. It does not change the predisposing factor because it doesn't change your DNA or your spiritual history. And it does not change your triggering factors. It doesn't change, let's just say, your aggressiveness or desire for revenge all the time and whatever it is. It does not remove that. It removes physical cells. So the two factors are still in place. And this is the important part. Let me go back to the beginning, something that I said before. You can have a predisposing factor and a triggering factor, and it will happen on a certain organ, not on another one. For another person, might be different. So it all depends. Now, for this person that just underwent surgery and it was a success and so on and so on and so, we know for sure, there is absolutely no doubt that there was a predisposing factor, and absolutely no doubt that there was a triggering factor. And the surgery did not remove any of them. You see what I'm getting? It's not unlikely. We don't want this to happen, but we're learning here Spiritism. It's not unlikely that there's a certain chance that this comes back, because the dynamite and the match are still there. If you light up the match, it's going to come back. How do we not light up the match? by changing the triggering factors. What does it mean, change the triggering factors? What are these triggering factors? They are vices, attitudes, behavior, bad behavior, attitudes against the law of God. If we don't change those, I'm lighting up the match. So it becomes a matter of time. Time being within this life, maybe next life. But we have to avoid at all costs lighting up the match again. So you see, when the removal of the tissues at the best, it triggers in the person, in the patient, the idea that, oh, I gotta change. I'm gonna go home and change my life, revisit my mistakes, whatever. I need time. Maybe I need to be alone for a few weeks or so, but there's gotta be a change. So the removal of the tissue is not what we in Spiritism call cure. It might be for medicine. So it's the same words with two different meanings. There's nothing wrong with the word, it's just used differently. So in Spiritism, cure means the triggering factor is gone. In medicine means the cells that were bad are gone. It is totally different. So cure for medicine is not the same as cure for Spiritism. So we have the existence of these recurring diseases. They are there because it needs to be understood that the match is still there. The triggering factor is still there. Real cure, from the Spiritist point of view, will only happen when we stop fighting the natural law. That's the only option. So we have people undergoing, I give you some examples like aggressiveness, rage, and desire for revenge all the time. Those are bad habits. Over time, they will become triggering factors they will become the match that gets lit up. How do we get out of it exactly? So let's take something that is relatively simple. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to make you understand. And I'm saying this on a personal experience. This is a personal testimony. Let's pick, for example, aggressiveness or rage. So all the time, you're you're aggressive against everything and everyone. Absolutely. I was like that in my younger days. And everything would make me unhappy. Everything was wrong. And then whining and crying and all the time. All the time. And then one day, that's a long time ago. Then one day, I was reading an article about Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. So it was an interesting article. It was talking about him, how the whole thing, how an astronaut's life is to be prepared for the mission. It's really stressful. And I was just reading through and became interested in the thing. But, as you read through, as I was reading through, I said, oh, my God, the life of these guys are a tremendous amount of stress, incredible what they have to go through. And it's really complicated. And I'm saying to myself, I never imagined it was this difficult. So I read this article and I got interested in the thing. So I started picking up articles talking about astronauts and, preparing to go to the moon and land on the moon and so. And then, I said, then we had images from, that NASA provided for not only Armstrong, but all the other missions when they stepped on the moon. And I said, when you look at these things, you see the astronaut is right there by himself, walking on the moon, doing whatever he's supposed to be doing. You look around, there's absolutely nothing. There's nothing. There's not a noise. He's all in that suit, special suit. So there's not a noise. There's nobody crying. And I go like, that's interesting. It might be a weird situation to be, in that suit in a completely different place and situation. Okay. So, at times when I was aggressive towards a situation or was I was going to be, I would just stop and say, wow, if I were on the moon, that would make no sense. Yeah, seriously. Seriously. I said, if I were on the moon right now, if I were an astronaut, that would make no sense to fight this guy who is doing this, to, become aggressive towards that person, to want revenge against this particular situation or person. It makes no sense. So, I was getting better and better because I was getting away from that moment when you get caught and you react badly. So I was getting better and better. And then one day I read an article on much later, that was a decade later, I think, an article on one of the astronauts, 12 astronauts walked over the moon. So Edgar Mitchell went to the moon. And this is, he passed away maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But this is what I'm going to say. He said to us, I'm not making this up. It's not my imagination when I saw the images. No, this is brought to us by him himself. So he said this. Of course, this astronaut life is stressful. So he goes, I go to the moon. I walk out of the vehicle. I stepped on the moon. And he says, the first thing I need to make sure is that I was in solid ground per se. So he steps and, he feels comfortable enough. This is solid ground. I'm good. I'm okay. I'm not going to fly out in space. So he felt comfortable. And then he said, I looked to the left. Like, I looked to the left. I looked to the right. I look in front. I turn around and look back, and I look up. And there's absolutely nothing going wrong. Absolutely nothing. Everything is in a tremendous state of peace. The stars are not fighting against each other. There's not a single star declaring war against the other. Not a star or planet is looking like this towards the other. No, he said it's a perfect harmony. In that moment, he's still an astronaut. He's still this man of steel, right? That we think of him like. So he said, in that moment, a tremendous feeling of transformation got through my spine. So he finished the mission, came down to the Earth. He had a contract with NASA for another year or so. When the contract expired, he said, I don't want to renew it. I'm changing my life. So he opened this institute. It's called Institute for Noetic Sciences, where they study, it's a scientific study of knowledge. It's an incredible thing. It's beautiful. If you have a chance, go to the website, Institute for Noetic Sciences. So he completely transformed his life. And he was here where all the trouble was, but he wasn't a troubled man anymore because he had this contact with peace. So I read this and I put it together with my first impressions of the moon and this sense of peace. And I said, that's it. That's what this is personal testimony. It might not work for you. Then I said, I myself think I found a good way that it's, to say the least, it's worth a try to change things around even more. I wasn't that aggressive anymore. but still, we go through situations where sometimes it's hard. You want to react badly. So I went through this exercise, and now it's something that is automated in my perispirit. So now it's easy. It wasn't in the beginning. And the exercise is, things are difficult. You're in the middle of a situation that doesn't look good. You're being, somebody is aggressive towards you. Somebody's treating you bad, or a group of people is treating you bad. So what I do is, just mentally go to the moon and feel that peace. There's nothing around me here. If you mentally go to the moon, your mind will look around 360, and you're not going to find anything wrong, anything that justifies a fight or bad behavior. That's what I do. Does it work? It does. Is it perfect? No, because I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But it does work. It brought me happiness doing this. That was my light at the end of the tunnel. Every one of us finds sooner or later a way to deal with, the troubles that we have to go through. That's why we are here on Earth. It's a planet of trials and expiations. We are here for that reason, to learn how to deal with these things. So when I'm on the moon, mentally speaking, when I'm on the moon, there is no bad neighbor. There is no, my neighbor's car is much better than mine. The neighbor's house is more beautiful than mine. There is no grass greener on the other side. That everything is, nothing of this makes sense, because these are material things. If we can detach, and that's why the idea of going to the moon for me worked. We go there, or I go there, and these things, they don't bother you. Just let go, let the people scream for 5 minutes. When the person stops screaming, just say a prayer towards them and thank that you are there, being given the opportunity to do a prayer for them, because if you weren't there, who would? So, wrapping up, we are responsible for everything we do in life. And we need to take responsibility also on how to be good. How to get to the point where goodness is automated in our perispirit. Think about Jesus. Do you think he had to think to do some charity work? He would say, maybe that person needs charity. Let me see. Let me think about if I'm going to do. That's absolutely ridiculous. There's no such a thing. Because charity was his language, his first language. So it was something, quotes, native for him. It's automated in the perispirits. We're all going to get there one day. But until then, we have to use our moons or whatever it is for everyone. For me, it's the moon. Just want to bring this personal testimony. I think it's interesting. We are going through a lot of challenges in our societies in general, humanity, at least in the last, I would say maybe 10 or 15 years, with more intensity than before. And we have Spiritism teaching us how to deal with them, how to, be firm and go. Never stop praying for you and for those who need, people who don't know how to ask for help. But there's a cry for help hidden in their actions by being aggressive, desire for bullying, rage, and so on and so on. So. Thank you very much once again for participating with us on the program tonight. And once again, Spiritism, a closer look. We'll be back here on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks so much.